In this video, I'm going to share with you 11 things you need to know in order to get a great paying job in the technology sector. So stick with me. So you're considering a career in tech, but maybe you need a little guidance on where to go. There's just so many possibilities and so many fields or technologies to explore, and you need a little bit of a path to follow. Well, let me introduce to you the idea of cloud engineering or site reliability engineering or DevOps engineering, and the 11 skills or concepts you kind of need to know in order to break into this industry and land a great job. And of course, the first thing you need to know is Linux. You talk to a lot of people, this is a recommendation you're gonna get. I remember I was in a game shop many years ago, and I overheard a conversation about a guy. He said, I wanna get in, I wanna do what you do. And this guy who was a senior, he had been in technology for a while, he said, well, learn Linux. That's the first thing you need to learn. Linux is foundational. Linux is, it's gonna be a gatekeeper in a lot of job interviews and things like that. It's going to be what a lot of your technology lives on. You're going to really need to know how to navigate Linux. And I'm going to save you some trouble because there's a lot of distributions of Linux out there. And I'm going to say for this first part, focus on learning Red Hat Linux or Linux flavor in that Red Hat family. And you can go to Red Hat's site and you can look on their certification path. What does it take to become a certified systems administrator? What does it take to become a certified engineer? Those skills are laid out for you, and then you can study those skills, and once you kind of have a grasp of every one of them, you'll know that you're ready to move forward in the world of Linux. And you could even get your first job as a Linux sysadmin with very little experience in the field. A lot of people progress from a help desk or a tech support role into a Linux sysadmin role. You just got to find that first company willing to work with you. And if you've not mastered, but you really understand all the concepts that are kind of laid out in that certification track, again, just on Red Hat's website, it's right there for you. Now, the website's not going to teach you everything. The website's going to give you a blueprint to follow. And if you want to learn Linux, I would say, hey, check out a Cloud Guru has a lot of courses on Linux. I'm not affiliated with any of these people. O'Reilly Media is a great one, a little more expensive, but they have a guy on there named Sander Van Voot. He's amazing. He teaches really well. He'll teach you everything you need to know to learn Linux and get started right away. You can learn, the first way I learned was from a book. That was hard, and I didn't really get my head around it. So I don't know if I would recommend a book right away. The best possible thing would be to take a class, like I said, with Sander Van Voot, or if you have someone who's willing to take the time to mentor you, that is the absolute best way to learn. But that's hard. You're not going to find a lot of mentors out there. Or you could find some mentors, but you're not going to find a ton of people with the time to take, an hour or two a day to really get you up to speed and get you where you need to know. Linux may be overwhelming at first. There's just a lot to know. Don't worry about it. Once you're on the other side of that learning wall, you're gonna think, okay, this isn't that bad. But you just got to get on the other side of that learning wall. You got to dive in. Linux is going to be the gatekeeper. All your interviews are going to use gatekeeping with Linux, and then we'll talk about Python. Or not Python necessarily, but a programming language as well. These are going to be a couple of early gatekeepers that people are going to use to kind of see if you're qualified for the role and things like that. So stick with Red Hat. We'll talk about some other flavors later, but for now, just get on that Red Hat path. You have, Alma, you used to have CentOS, you have Fedora. You can learn with these. And you don't have to get a certification. You don't have to prove yourself in any way out there in the world. Just when you go for an interview, you're gonna have to know pretty decent amount of Linux, and it's their job to disqualify you. But I think if you went to a job and you knew Linux really well, that you'd be great. Second thing I want to touch on is Python. I had mentioned it previously. Yeah, every job is going to hit you with some sort of scripting requirement, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and save you a lot of time and say, well, pick Python, because everywhere I've worked, Python is pretty commonly used. Everyone accepts Python. Now, you need to learn a little bit of Bash, but you're going to learn that as you're learning Linux. And I wouldn't harp too much on Bash. I would focus on Python. Learn Python. I would say take a 100 Days of Code course or something along those lines. There's someone on Udemy called Angela Wu who has a really amazing 100 Days of Code. and actually do the 100 days of code. And at the end of that, you're going to find yourself very proficient. And with Python, I would say don't stop. Once you've done your 100 days of code, or once you've gone through these initial training courses, keep going. Find projects you're interested in. Maybe start teaching other people who'd like to know Python. There's a website, I think it's called py4e.com. That's a great website, and it's totally free to get started. So the second tech you need to learn, or the second idea you need to wrap your head around, is a coding language, a scripting language of some kind. And I would suggest Python, just because it's just everywhere. It's so widespread. Third thing I'd want to say is learn a cloud technology of some kind. You have a few options: Amazon's AWS, Google's GCP, Microsoft's Azure. Learn a cloud, just one. You don't have to learn all three. Now, eventually you would want to learn all three, but for now, just learn one and learn the core services. You don't need to learn all the other weird things that they have, because they have a ton of services. Learn about the compute services, learn about the storage services, learn about their security. And I would say for any cloud, the most important thing to really grasp your head, or to get your head around, would be IAM. That's Identity and Access Management. If you can master IAM, man, you are set for life, because that ties all the pieces together. So learn a cloud. That skill is in such high demand these days. And I would say, hey, make it simple. Learn AWS first, just because, hey, it's the most, there's going to be the most documentation out there. You're going to have the most users out there. And most of the time, AWS jobs dominate the market. So you'll see a lot of those. Now, the three clouds kind of fight for space in that. So I've seen some periods where Google is winning. I've seen the last couple of months, I've seen a ton of Azure jobs come up. But by and large, AWS jobs tend to dominate the market. And now I'm going to tell you about the fourth technology you need to learn, and that's Terraform. Now, Terraform is key. If you want to be a cloud engineer or a DevOps engineer, Terraform is so critical and so widely used these days. And I told you to learn a cloud first before you learn Terraform, because once you start learning Terraform, it's going to make sense, because you use Terraform to create all the resources that live on your cloud. So Terraform is an infrastructure as code tool, and it helps you with infrastructure as code best practices. And infrastructure as code just means you have a way to, it's almost like you're documenting the entire process. So you can take a module, like say you wanted a new VM, a virtual machine. It's basically your server in the cloud, right? You can write a virtual machine module and save that code, and you can use it for the rest of your career. You can share it with people. You can submit it to a repository. You can add new versions to it. And Terraform is kind of I don't want to say the future, but it's the best thing we got going right now, and pretty much everyone's using it. So learn Terraform. That is a great technology, and it's going to tie in your cloud knowledge really well. So the fifth technology I want to talk about, and I moved this one up, and it's a little out of place as far as like, hey, you're an absolute beginner. What do I need to do to break in? But this is a hot technology. It's called Kubernetes. Learn Kubernetes now. Start learning a little bit about Kubernetes now. Dive in if you find it interesting. I kind of wedged Kubernetes into this list because I think Kubernetes is just going to be around for the next 10 years. Everybody's using Kubernetes. Kubernetes has really high earning potential. People love to see it. I think you're going to see higher salaries if you learn Kubernetes. I think you're going to see a lot of people interested in you because you know this technology. And Kubernetes is interesting because a lot of people are scared to dive into it for some reason. And so I would say jump on the Kubernetes bandwagon now. Start getting good with it, because these are like 150K jobs that Kubernetes is gonna start. You're gonna start seeing with Kubernetes. It's really a great technology to get into. The sixth thing I want to talk about is called pipelines. You're going to hear this term CI/CD pipelines. And when you start studying pipelines, that's going to make a lot more sense. But there's two technologies I want to talk about. The first one is called Jenkins. Learn Jenkins because I've never worked for a company that didn't use Jenkins in 10 years. And everyone's going to complain about Jenkins and call it Jenkins and this, that, and the other, but I don't see it going away. So learn Jenkins. But I would also say, hey, check out something called GitHub Actions and that GitHub workflow. I'm seeing that one pop up more and more these days. It's something that job I'm working just recently implemented. So it's called GitHub Actions. There's a lot of people on YouTube talking about it, and there's some great courses out there as well. So learn that CI/CD pipeline, because that's also going to be just a huge part in these DevOps jobs. All right, the 7th technology I want to talk about is Ansible. You're going to go through, you're going to learn Linux, you're going to learn how to do all these things in Linux, and you're going to get to your first, like say, sysadmin job, and they're going to want to do everything via Ansible. Well, it's great to know all this Linux, because that's what you're going to be Ansibleizing. That's kind of the term you'll hear. It's a fake word, but that's the term you're going to hear sometimes. Learn Ansible. It's a great tool, and there's going to be other tools thrown at you like Chef and Puppet. I'm going to say learn Ansible. That seems to be dominating the market right now, and personally, it's my favorite. So check out Ansible after you've learned Linux pretty well, though, because you're going to see how Linux and Ansible's relationship is really close, and it's just going to make a lot more sense once you've got Linux under your belt. All right, the 8th thing we need to talk about is databases. You got to know, for some reason, like I know this is kind of 1990s where you had that LAMP stack developer thing, and you had to know PHP and MySQL. There's still a ton of people out there who want you to know a database. So you got to learn a database, and I would suggest Postgres or Mongo or both. Let's say Mongo, because Mongo University is free and it's online, and you can study it at your own pace, and you can really get your head around Mongo quickly. You can get very proficient in Mongo kind of quick. And there's a lot of resources for Postgres. And Postgres, it's just, you'll learn what a relational database is, and that's Postgres, and that's, you're going to learn about NoSQL and all this as you're learning about these different databases. So I don't need to go too far into that. Postgres is super popular these days, or just learn good old-fashioned MySQL. I have been in interviews. I have been in hundreds of interviews, everybody. So trust me when I say this, you're going to want to learn probably MySQL, I guess, let's say that, but Postgres is really hot, so I'm really torn between suggesting the two. But I have gone to interviews where they want you to know this stuff, and you may never touch a database, or you may just build out a database and not need to know anything else. Just learn about databases, learn about scaling and all that, because this is going to come up in your interviews. The 9th thing I want to talk about is Git. G-I-T, it's Git. It's just a way to stash code. It's a way to version code. It helps you with what they call pull requests, so your code can go through reviews and things like that. Git's just an industry standard tool. It won't take you long to learn. You don't need to deep dive into it. You just need to know how to do, how to pull repositories, add code to repositories, and that's about it. Git can get more complicated. But for now, just learn the basics, because they're not gonna, I've never had an interview where they're like, do this crazy stuff with Git. Nothing like that. 10th idea I want to talk about, just learn the basics, right? It won't take you very long, but learn the basics of, I don't want to say computer science, because that's going to send you down a crazy rabbit hole. Learn like the basics of networking. Learn the basics of like TCP/IP, or how the internet works, right? Like, how does an IP address work? What happens when you hit, send on a web page? What is a post request? All these little basic things you will get interviewed on. And maybe there's a course you could find out there that's just like kind of IT basics. You don't need to you do not need to be a networking expert. You don't need to be a computer science expert. You just need to know some of these concepts, like operating system basics. What is an operating system? What is kernel space? What is user space? What's a driver do? Why do we need an operating system? I have been asked that. I have been asked, describe an operating system to me. I have the first tech support job I ever get, which was my first technical job ever. The first question was, how does the internet work? Well, that's easy. Tell them, you don't need to go into super basic, just kind of give them a basic idea. The 11th and final thing I'd like to talk about is, all right, now I've given you some very specific technologies to learn. That's going to get you in the door. That's going to get you going. You're going to be able to smash interviews with these 10 technologies. But this 11th idea is the other technologies you're going to run into. I really don't want you to go down this rabbit hole. But at the beginning of the video, I said learn the Red Hat family of Linux. Well, you're also going to see a ton of Ubuntu, especially in some cloud situations. You're going to see a ton of Ubuntu stuff out there. That is another Linux operating system. So you can start looking into Ubuntu. You're going to see a lot of similarities, but there's a lot of differences. For example, user add versus add user. Some of the commands are just a little different. Some of the concepts are just a little different. So after you've got Red Hat under your belt, get familiar with Ubuntu, because that is out there a lot. And I have had interviews where they're testing me on an Ubuntu server. So yeah, be ready for anything, but don't dive. There's so many Linux flavors out there. When you're just trying to break into a career, stick with these two for now. And then I mentioned when I was talking about Ansible, there were other things like Puppet and Chef. You're going to see Puppet out in the wild. It's not as popular as we thought it was going to be. It's not as popular as it used to be, but you're going to see Puppet out in the wild. So I would say, just check it out. You could honestly probably not ever learn it, honestly, and get away with it and still have a great career in tech, honestly. Chef, probably the same thing, but Chef is a pretty good tool. So I would say, you can check that out if you want. There's a ton of technologies out there. There's a ton of paths you can take. But remember, learn Linux, learn a Red Hat family of Linux. Learn a scripting language. I suggest Python because it's just so widely used and it would be easy to find courses on and kind of easy to pick up on. Learn a cloud. Learn AWS first, or if you like GCP, Google's option, learn that one. And then eventually learn all three. People love someone who knows all three. And there's actually more clouds to learn, but I don't want to go into something like OpenStack or Oracle's cloud or anything like that, because then I feel like I'm throwing way too much at you. Learn Terraform, learn Kubernetes, learn Jenkins, or some kind of pipeline technology that you like. Learn Ansible, pick up a database or two, learn Git, and then pick up some of those basics. Guys, this is going to get you a tech job. You just got to find someone out there ready to work with you. And maybe you have to build up, do some tech support, do some help desk, and then boom, you're going to land that first tech job. And you're well on your way to six figures at that point. Not only are you well on your way to six figures, you're well on your way to high six figures, higher than you think. I'm not talking about just 100 even. I'm talking you can soon, after a few years, be knocking on the door of 200 plus. So just bear that in mind. All right, I hope this helps someone out there.